administration, when I have a question, I reach out to Dr. Hatem. And my dissertation, which I finished last week on the 14th, he was the first person to see it. So I hold him in high esteem. But enough about me. Dr. Hatem, I got to know him as the chairman of the board of American Muslims for Palestine. For those of you who don't know American Muslims for Palestine, it is the organization, the preeminent organization in the United States that specializes in the defense of everything Palestine. I have a lot of respect for all the other organizations. And actually, we were just talking, I was on the phone before I came with Brother Nihad Awad of Care. I hold him, زي ما بيقولوا على راسي. And I've known him for 40 years. I know the brothers from MLFA, Muslim Legal Fund of America. I've been in this country 50 years. I know them all. But no organization, grassroots, has served the Palestinian cause more than AMP and under the leadership of Brother HATEM BAZIAN. He's a professor at UC Berkeley. He is also the head of an Islamophobia study think tank that I would love to join as soon as I finish defending my dissertation. And his resume is too long to count. His books are amazing. His last book, Eraser, I can't put it down. So I don't want to take up too much of his time. I would love for you to just pay attention to what he has to say. I'm here to sit as a student and learn from the master himself. Without further ado, I'd like to present Dr. HATEM BAZIAN. Takbir.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Is this one working here? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. جزاكم الله خير على introduction, so I don't need to say anything right now, right? We'll do the Juha says, do you know what I'm going to say? They said no. He said, well, I'm not going to speak to people who don't understand what I'm going to say. But alhamdulillah, I wanted to speak not only about the immediate events in Palestine, which is very important, but for us to have the context, the historical context, because history did not begin in October 7th, and definitely history is not going to continue to be only looked on in a short period of time. If we want to analyze the current development in Palestine, we have to really think of Oslo and what Oslo have done in order for us to understand the current development. Okay, so just as a quick progression, leaving before 1993, the end of the Cold War and the US intervention in the Middle East with the war on Iraq, the Gulf Storm 1, brought about an attempt to try to resolve, between two quotation marks, the Palestine cause or issue, but on the basis of Israel's priorities. And Israel's priority foundationally is not to actually accept a two-state solution. Even though Rabin came and signed the agreement itself was faulty from its foundation. In any negotiations between two parties or two powers that are at war, usually there is a finality to what is being negotiated before you sign. Even the United States had the negotiations with Vietnam to end the Vietnam War, and then the hostilities ended, and that was the finality. But as a result of the structure by which the Oslo Agreement was brought about, the signature of the Palestinians was to give full recognition to Israel. So if you read the letter of Yasser Arafat, it was a full recognition of Israel as a sovereign state, while Israel, in the corresponding letter, only recognized the PLO right to negotiate. So in essence, on the one hand, the Palestinians, who had all the issues that are present, gave recognition to Israel as a sovereign state, 78% of Palestine, settlements in the Gaza Strip, settlements in the West Bank, and then referring that all of the issues to be negotiated within a 5-year period. Now, in negotiations, and I don't want to go to soon to be Dr. Abbasi, you don't let go of your key assets before you actually gain. You actually bought the price 3 times what you expect to get. And if you negotiate down, you negotiate down to what you already know your threshold. So the Palestinians negotiated, again, wherever your position is on 1 state, 2 state, and so on, the negotiations was framed around 2-state solution, Resolution 181 of the United Nations, 242 and 338 as the framework. So the Palestinians gave the signature, and in return, they only got to be invited to negotiate further. And that created the whole infrastructure, multilateral negotiations on key issues, bilateral negotiations on other issues, and in a 5-year period, Israel did not deliver on any of the key withstanding issues. One, the key issue of Jerusalem. Second, the issue of borders. Israel is the only country in the world that does not have borders. Like in the United Nations, there's no set borders. So the issue of borders, the issue of settlements, the issue of right of return, and water and resources inside the occupied territories. All these issues are to be set aside. The only area of Oslo that was actually negotiated and implemented was the security protocols. So the security protocols, which was followed by Cairo 1, Way River 1, Way River 2, Camp David, all of the negotiations was actually structured around security, not for the Palestinians, but for the Israelis. Not for the Palestinians in the West Bank, but for the settlers. It's the first time in the history of occupied structures is that they have the occupied people guaranteeing the security of their occupier on their own land. That was the Oslo Agreement. Now, the Oslo collapsed as a result of the Israeli right wing. Baruch Goldstein, in 1995, when he entered on the Palestinians who were praying in the Khalil Mosque and shot down 47 Palestinians who were praying the Fajr prayer in Ramadan and injuring many, that pretty much brought the whole peace process from the Israeli side to a screeching halt, and began the right-wing agitation, in particular with Netanyahu. Now, many in Israel, especially on the left, blame Netanyahu incitement prior to the assassination of Rabin, that he actually was inciting against Rabin that ended up the assassination of Rabin. So if you want to jump to October 7th, you need to actually put that as part of the progression in discussing what is taking place in Palestine. So that's an important piece. Second, we said that the 5 overarching issues were not to be discussed. They were basically set aside. When Yasser Arafat signed the 1993 agreement, there were 130,000 settlers in the West Bank. What is the number? 130,000. Today, in the West Bank, there's 750,000 settlers, which means almost 6.5-fold increase in the number of settlers that were moved into the occupied territories. And what we need to think is that we really don't have a contiguous West Bank. We have cantons separated, almost 8 separate concentrations of population, intersected with 575 checkpoints that Palestinians have to go through, aside from what's called the roving checkpoints. Any soldiers with a small units can actually set a checkpoint anywhere in the West Bank. Now, I know we're paying attention to the Gaza Strip, and people who want you to speak about Gaza and so on. Let's set aside Gaza. Since the beginning of this year, 435 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank. Almost on a daily basis, between 2 to 4 Palestinians being shot and killed before October 7th. And now, up to yesterday, at least before I did not check the news, 81 have been killed in the West Bank and possibly have increased. And that also part of the process, which I will get to in terms of the changes, the changing political landscape in Israel itself with the current government. So the West Bank is really one of the major areas where Israel wants to continue to annex as much land as possible with as fewer Palestinians as there is inside the West Bank. All right. So again, 130,000 in the signing of Oslo, 750,000. It divided the area into 3 areas: A, B, and C. Area C is pretty much emptied of Palestinians now. Area C, which is the largest part of the West Bank, is Area C. Is the Jordan Valley. It's outside of the areas that where the major population center. Area C is being systematically emptied of Palestine, and whatever Palestinians left in there, they don't have the economic sustainability to maintain their livelihood because of what the settlements and settlers have done in the process of this transformation. Area B, you have a mixture, and much of the conflicts right now with the settlers is actually trying to take more of Area B, and you are left only with Area C, with Area A, which is where most of the Palestinians, and increasingly they're being honed down with the understanding that if you don't want to stay here, you need to leave. What we've been talking about for some time is the concept of silent ethnic cleansing. Israel moves slowly, in essence, and the silent ethnic cleansing to make it impossible for people to live in the economic conditions that are there. And their idea is basically to try to provide some economic incentives to let go of land rights of the Palestinians. So I'm going to move to the last year specifically, and the current Israeli government. The current Israeli government, actually, if you think of the 3 politicians, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, and Michael Ben-Ari, they had a billboard during the elections saying, "Kahana lives." Kahana lives. Now, for people in this area, they know Mayor Kahana. In the United States, the Kahanist movement is declared as a terrorist organization. All right? Both Smotrich and Ben-Gvir were actually charged with crimes in Israel. For you to be charged in crimes in Israel, it takes a very high ceiling to understand the type of personalities that we have. Netanyahu incorporated or agreed to have a coalition between the Kahana groups, the extreme right-wing groups, in order for him to win the seat of prime minister. Why? Because he's facing 3 corruption cases. And as long as he stays in the prime minister office, these cases can't move forward because he has the immunity of the prime minister office, because you can't be serving as a prime minister or in public office and being also facing prosecution. So in essence, delays the process for him, and in essence, he signed a quid pro quo type of agreement to have the Kahanists being in the government. But more importantly, he turned to Ben-Gvir the internal security apparatus and allowed Ben-Gvir to set up his own security force that does not need to go to be to the oversight of the government. Basically, with all intents and purposes, a government-sanctioned militia that could do whatever it wants without actually being prosecuted or brought under review. That is not what you call the work of democracies or the rule of law, because in essence, it allows Smotrich to go back to the early history of Zionism, where having these forces, the Stern Gang, the Irgun, to conduct operation, and that's the type of atmosphere that Ben Gvir has put in there, a force only answerable to Ben Gvir, who is really answerable and comes out of the heavy settler communities inside the West Bank. Now, Netanyahu, upon taking office, he said the following: the Jewish people have an exclusive and unquestionable right to all areas of the land of Israel. Now, we said the Oslo agreement from early, Oslo did not want to give two-state solution or give land for peace, all this framing that many in what you call in the liberal circles, every time you talk to them about Palestine, say, oh, I am for the two-state solution. It's like, what states? The one in Mars? All right? So in essence, this becomes a way of not actually dealing with what happened and what is taking place. There is no two-state solution for Netanyahu. You just need to understand. There is no two-state solution for the Israeli government. It's been dead for quite some time. And Netanyahu has both a personal commitment as well as a Zionist overarching coalition commitment. Personal commitment: his father is the editor of Vladimir Jabotinsky's papers. All right? Vladimir Jabotinsky is the person who was most identified with what's called revisionist Zionism. He's the person who actually spoke about the Iron Wall. He's the person that actually fomented many of the early riots in the 1920s, was arrested by the British, and he basically says reconciliation with the Arabs is impossible. And he said, if you want to have a colonial project, you need to understand that you need to use violence and you need to have a protector, meaning a major power that supports you. So Netanyahu's father is the editor and the custodian of Jabotinsky's paper. And Netanyahu is not gonna make something that will tarnish from his, what you call narrow perspective, the history and the legacy of his father and his family. So there is a personal commitment, and he actually, on many occasions, basically dispensed with the idea of two-state solutions. All right? So in here, what he's saying in this statement, he says, the Jewish people have an exclusive, right? We're talking about the concept of exclusivity, an unquestionable right to all areas of the land of Israel. The land of Israel includes what's called the West Bank. They refer to it as Judea and Samaria. Right? So anyone that had the idea that there is two-state solution, especially when you speak to politicians, you just take this statement and say, please, can you explain this to me? Because you go and visit Israel and you take what you call delegations in there. I want you to understand what this sentence means, right, in relation to all the areas of Israel, because they ask of us to make certain statements. You politicians should be answering the statements because they're in violation of international law. They're actually supporting a total violation of all UN resolutions. We have what you call the constant engagement. We know the UN more than the UN knows itself. Right? We have like the calamity that we know every UN Secretary General, as if like one of our cousins, we invite him to weddings. Right? Nobody cares about, like, if you look in the United States, anybody cares about UN Secretary General? That anybody invites him to weddings? All right? I'm not going to invite him to Knafe, right? There's just like too much. Right? But in general, we tend to appeal to the international set of documents, the UN resolutions, for Geneva Convention, and so on. And almost everybody in the West just really just throws it to the wall. Right? And we tend to appeal to this without anyone listening. So what Netanyahu is saying is basically that there is no other right, exclusive right, right? And then they passed also a Knesset resolution, says that the Jewish people have the only sovereignty in Palestine. Now, again, setting aside the West Bank, setting aside Gaza because people have a problem. How about the Palestinians in 1948? In the resolution of Knesset, meaning they have no sovereignty, right? Because only sovereignty is to be ascribed to the Jewish members of the Jewish state per Netanyahu. So you have about approximately 27% of the population, citizens that have no sovereignty over their land. So in Israel, Palestinians who are part of the 1948 are subject to 65 discriminatory laws that treat them not only third, they're actually fourth because there's different hierarchy. The first are what's called Western Jews. Second is the Eastern Jews. Third is actually can be ascribed to Druze and to those who serve Israel. And then after that, the Palestinians, Christians and Muslims. So actually you have a very crafted hierarchy within the Israeli society. So again, in here he's saying that only the exclusive rights are to be attached to Israel. In the coalition agreement, he goes even further. He says the nation of Israel has a natural right to the land of Israel. So we move, again, for us who have studied this, the Balfour Declaration says there is a historical connection, historical link. Didn't say they have a historical right. Even Balfour, which is like wanting to sell the house and all what's in it, did not say this. So now we're moving into a natural right that is codified into Israeli law. And he says, in light of the belief that in the aforementioned right, the Prime Minister will formulate and promote policies within whose framework sovereignty will be applied to Judea and Samaria, to the West Bank. You need to understand that. Meaning that this is a Knesset and the government agreement that formulate that anyone who talks about two-state solution, right, basically is done with, because in here saying that we will exercise sovereignty that will be applied to Judea and Samaria. Right? That's basically the agreement that is there. Another agreement or another resolution in the Knesset, Israel's Knesset Committee agrees to fast-track bill to revoke citizenship of Palestinian prisoners. So even Palestinian prisoners who are in prison, you have them in the prison. What else do you want? They want to actually remove the citizenship from them. So Israel can actually say, we are not discriminating, or in essence, these are individuals that are no longer. Now, if you notice, there's some politicians in this country that are beginning to forward that same type of language. Maybe they're studying under the same, what you call circle, but the same type of Israelization of our own domestic policies here in the United States are formulating in the same way, and we need to be aware of it in that way. Now, in the United States, we need to understand that some of the political acceptance of this language, even the J Street, which often is seen as a liberal part, as the J Street in their conference, it says separation with solid Jewish majority is what we're seeking. Separation with solid Jewish majority. For you in here in the United States, is basically appealing for a Jim Crow laws. Separate but equal, but in here separate and unequal in relation to Palestine. So this is J Street in their convention actually promoting this idea of a separate type of political system, which is expanded or autonomy for the Palestinians, but no rights, no sovereignty rights. That's been the agreement, and I will get into the normalizations that was actually trying to affirm this for the Palestinians. Another Knesset member, he says the concept of proportionality must cease to exist. 1,000 Palestinians' mothers will cry. This is as a result of, before even October 7th, that Israel's response always have to be overwhelming, and therefore if one Israeli is hurt, in essence 1,000 mothers hurt, meaning that we will take 1,000 or hurt 1,000. So in international law there is a concept of proportionality in response. Not that I'm going to do that. If I hit you with my fist, I'm not going to do that. You're allowed to hit me once, twice, and maybe in my stomach, and that's proportional because I again engaged in assault. You can't go and get what you call a bazooka and get all of your neighborhood and beat, the lights out. I mean, that is disproportionate, and it's not in international law. Right? Even in the conduct of war, for Geneva Convention, the principle of proportional response. So Israel does not accept nor practices this, even though they constantly promote that they are the most moral army in the world. But don't hold your breath on that, considering what's taken place. Now I want to go to the State Department language. Now, the State Department, every time that there is a Palestinian does something, the United States comes with, the United States condemns in the strongest terms the horrific terrorist attack today outside, right? So the language is very specific. It expresses maximum type of response. It identifies who the perpetrator, right, and who is the victim. Right? That's the State Department. When it comes to a Palestinian being hurt, impacted, killed, so on, we are deeply concerned by the escalating violence. It doesn't say anything, right? And if you have monitored the news these days, it's like we're living in a parallel universe. I don't know if you saw the statements that are coming from Biden. I actually been tweeting back at him. I say, is this AI generated? Is this a spoof? Because I really can't tell what really, in terms of the language, it's very precise when it comes to Israel. It's actually general and almost obfuscating, right? We are deeply concerned by the escalating violence and loss of innocent life in the West Bank following a counterterrorism operation. So civilians being killed, they're not mentioned. Escalating violence is basically maybe some people down the street escalating. We just don't know. We don't know who's doing what, right? Where it's always the Palestinians that are being killed constantly. Just yesterday, the APA, the American Bar Association, after 500 Palestinians being killed in the Al-Ahli hospital, sends out a statement. The opening lines says, "We are deeply concerned." That's the APA, this American Bar Association, the highest legal body. Right? I actually tweeted back and basically said it's one of the most cowardly statements I have seen coming out. I said, I'm greatly concerned with my falafel sandwich is cold. That's when you say something greatly concerned. But 500 people perishing with one bombing as the highest legal body representing the legal minds of this country, all right, putting this type of language. So again, there's a constant difference in terms of language that is applied. And the same we see it in the media, right? So the media, whenever a Palestinian does something and a Jewish person gets killed or Israeli gets killed, right? It mentions the person, mentions the Palestinians, it mentioned the Israelis, and it mentioned that he was killed. Palestinians only die, right? This is what you call language is very important because on the one hand, there is a victim, there's a perpetrator, and there's a crime. In this, he died. How? Allah yarhamu, did he have a peanut, what you call, allergy? Did he choke on the water? Did he trip? We have no idea what's happened. And most often the report actually is given to us from Israeli military public relations. So most of US media just need to know their report out of Israel has to go through the Israeli censors. So we don't get actually the reporting that is taking place. And we see it with the bombing of Al-Ahli, right? The initial post by Naftali went out that we hit the hospital and celebrating or indicating this happened. As the story developed, we have completely the Israeli military came with the story and the press ran with it faster than a Ferrari running with the story, and everybody begins to frame it. So, and this has been the case constantly, from the Qana massacre to Sabra and Shatila massacre to every massacre that Israel conducts is basically the same framing, is to blame the Palestinians, even the shooting of Shireen Abu Akleh, right, the assassination, all of the denial. Then later on down the line, Israel actually says, oh, it might have been us, right? And the United States, again, is a US citizen, let me just be very clear. Not all citizenship is equal. I know that we believe that we're American citizens, but don't take that too seriously. And I would recommend for you to look at the black community. They've been citizens in this country longer than anyone. Their citizenship has never been a major protection for them. Right? And we do have a racial difference that exists relative to citizenship and who gets to be recognized fully in their humanity and their articulation of citizenship and not. So again, so CNN breaking news, at least 5 people are reported to have been shot dead. Right? So again, we have versus a number of individuals got killed, right, or died, and we don't know yet the cause of their death. Right? So again, you begin to contemplate this possibilities and say, when Palestinians are shot, there is a Knesset member, he says, nice and professional work by the fighters in Jenin. Keep killing them. It's a politician. Right? Can you imagine a Arab or a parliament member actually putting on their Twitter out in the open, killing them, right? Without any remorse whatsoever. So again, this is part of the dynamics relative to Palestine. So Oslo made it possible for Palestinians to be in this situation. The security agreement allowed for Israel to have all the rights of hot pursuit, to actually mandate that the Palestinians be responsible for the security of the settlers and settlements, and the Palestinians have no sovereignty whatsoever. This added to the normalization process. Right? Since Oslo, since the Palestinians signed, Israel engaged in bilateral agreements to normalize relations. So today we have Israel normalized relations with Morocco, with Mauritania, Egypt prior to that, Jordan, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates. They have not completed Oman, and also Saudi Arabia was in the final stages of possibly negotiating. It was not the Palestinian issue that was the hold up. The hold up was Saudi Arabia wanting a nuclear program and wanting certain guarantees to be equal to power dynamics with Israel. So that was, if you listen to MBS interview with Fox, he basically says it's a tangential issue, Palestinian issue, right? And indication that if Saudi Arabia would have signed, normalized, that possibly a couple of other countries from the Muslim world would actually join, which basically will dispense with Palestinian cause altogether. And we begin to have only an economic program that giving the Palestinians was called a golden cage. Economic incentives, work permits, maybe development in the IT industry, but there is no notions of a sovereign state for the Palestinians. Right? So the Gaza has been under 17-year siege. And likewise, we need to dissect this. This did not begin October 7th. Gaza as a territory was evacuated by the settlers and settlements in August of 2005. When the Israelis evacuated Gaza from settlers and settlements, they actually directed the settlers to go to the West Bank. That's one. Second, it did not end Gaza as an occupied territory. All of Gaza population is called under international law IDP, internationally dependent people. That's their classification. No one in Gaza has citizenship. They're not citizens. Because what country claims, what country do they belong to? They're Palestinians. There is no Palestinian state. Again, don't let the UN festivities and allowing us to be in a debating team every once in a while take it. Even though that we had to appeal to be able to have an observer status to forward some resolutions, Palestine is not a state. Egypt does not claim the Palestinians in Gaza, so they're not citizens of Egypt. Jordan did not claim the Palestinians even after 1948, because there was, for a period, Egypt oversaw them, but they were still under United Nations, managed and with the oversight of UNRWA. So they are IDP, internationally dependent people. meaning that it is all of these so-called international community, the five permanent powers in the UN and the international community is responsible under the articulation of international law for their well-being. More so, Israel is actually mandated because there was some pause that Israel sends food, medicine, and allows supplies. That's their obligation under the Fourth Geneva Convention. Don't let them tell you that, oh, we are so generous. No, you're not generous because you're taxing people. You're taking resources. You actually have the birth registry in there, and you have total control. It's the largest open air prison in the world. If you want to occupy, you have obligation under occupation. That's what the Fourth Geneva Convention that was passed, adopted after the Second World War. If you don't want to be occupying people, then get out, right? So if you say, well, you're giving me trouble. Well, you know, there are a lot of therapists that could actually, I could direct you them, but you don't have a right to be here. But you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? So 2005, they evacuated, but they actually constructed a complete siege, right, from the outside, meaning that Palestinians in Gaza could not freely move, even during that period, right? Because there's 3 crossings into Israel and then 1 crossing in Rafah down, and it's highly, highly regulated. If you're born in Gaza, you're registered by the registry that Israel controls. The only electric station is powered by Israel, and constantly Palestinians have only 4 hours of electricity on any given day. Now, the calamity, as you know, is that the Arab world has the largest oil and natural gas reserves in the world. And then across on the Mediterranean side of Gaza, there's a massive gas field that's right now is being developed by agreement between a number of countries, including Egypt and Israel. There should be no reason for Gazans not to have natural gas, electricity 24/7. Right, so that's, again, the area. So internationally dependent people. 2006, again, I'm just giving you some memory. King George Bush, right, our own, wanted an election. Because if you remember, his program and his policy in Iraq was a total failure. So he wanted to play a PR game, and he wanted an election. And where did he want this election? Well, the Palestinians are good to test with. So he wanted to have an election. So he insisted on having an election, and he had a tiff between him and Yasser Arafat. Arafat said, we're not ready. So the US wanted an election, just to be sure. Because Bush wanted to appear that, you see, I'm promoting democracy after a disaster in Iraq, where, you know, job well done, whatever, when he was on the aircraft carrier. Right, mission accomplished, all of this. So he mandated to have an election in there. At the time, I recommended they should have sent the machines from Florida to run the election, but they were already auctioned on eBay. Right? So the election, they were thinking that in that election, that Fatah will win. And at best, they were actually lobbied heavily for Hamas to enter into the political fray. They talked to the Egyptians, they talked to the Saudis, they talked to everyone to influence them to come, because as long as you're outside the political game, you have far more leverage than being in the game. So they incentivized to get into the game, because George Bush wanted to say, you see, I brought the whole Palestinians to come, and we're hoping that they will win 1/3 of the seats, and thus will be part of the political landscape. Fatah entered into the election divided. They had 2 slates running, competing with one another. Result that Hamas won 2/3 of the seats. A crisis. This is what happens when you have what you call a one-dimensional policy. It never fulfills because you did not take account of all the intricacies, because people are not what you call robots. Right? Even robots today with AI, we think that they are actually far more dynamic. Right? So that resulted in implementation of Plan B. And I recommend for people, there was an article in Vanity Fair that specifically looked at Plan B. After the election turned out different, they had Plan B, which is to try to scuttle the election and to try to bring Mahmoud Dahlan from Egypt with troops ready to enter. And that resulted in the collapse of the political process, and 2 governments appeared, one in Gaza and one in the West Bank. And from Netanyahu's perspective, this is what you call the best of all worlds, because we could continue to play this division from not allowing anything to progress. And anytime there is an attempted reconciliation within the Palestinians, whether under the Saudis, under the Egyptians, under the Qataris, under any format, to make sure that the US pressure a lack of, to prevent the reconciliation, because this allows for Israel to continue to expand and continue to have uninterrupted settlements expansion. And also constantly attacking Gaza. Again, we have 7 major attacks in Gaza. Everyone that is almost more intense than before. Total siege. Gazas are the only people that are on a diet as a part of violation of, it's a war crime. Right? In this country, you overeat and then you go on a diet. In Gaza, you are actually placed on a diet by a decision of a government that wants to actually for you to live, but not to flourish. Right? So the calorie intake of Gazans are very limited. Gazans, kids, actually is the only area in the world where we have stunted growth. Every other area, people actually, their height is increasing and their full development is increasing, except in Gaza, we have stunted growth. 92% of the kids in Gaza actually are facing mental health issue, PTSD. We have a high number of kids that actually still wet their beds at age 13 and 14 as a result of this continued multiple traumas and transgenerational traumas. Water, the UN said by 2020, water in Gaza will be undrinkable. We are 2023. Right? It is not for the lack of water, because all of the water is still, if you look at outside of Gaza, all the water has been taken for the lush greens, all of the greenery that's outside of the Gaza, and it's literally have resulted in seawater seeping into the aquifers and the underground water in Gaza. So that's also as a result of this. It's literally a man-made disaster zone that have resulted within the Gaza over the past 17 years. In the 2014 attack, as a result of it, is also closing all of the tunnels that people actually were using to smuggle things for their daily life. I know actually a person here in the United States, she got married by going in the tunnel to Gaza. They got the wedding in Gaza and then came out of the tunnel after getting married. So not only that people were smuggling all the things that they need from basic goods, but actually people wanting to get married, going through the tunnel to get married. As a result of US, Israel, and Egyptian policy, they put a 30-feet subterranean steel wall to prevent the tunnels, thus tightening the total control over the livelihood of the Gaza's population. So all of this creates the context of what happened is basically it's a dead end that Gaza have reached in terms of where they are at, and how to begin to deal with the normalization that's already bypassing the Palestinians. This is not to excuse or to discuss the specific, but to understand in any type of a criminal case or any type, actually what is the context? People don't get up in the morning by themselves. What is the context that brings this around? And in essence, gets us into this current circumstances that we are seeing. Now, the last part I want to say about US policy, right, which is increasingly have resorted back to some of the most almost atrocious Islamophobic jingoism that we see. It has emboldened settler colonialism of Israel to engage in constant violence. So the United States cast veto vote in the United Security, 2 vetoes in the past week alone. We often think of Russia and China, and people criticize them, rightly so, welcome anytime. The United States have vetoed more resolutions in the United Nations Security Council than any country on the face of this earth, and the overwhelming majority of these resolutions have to do with Palestine and protecting Israel at the United Nations, right? So almost just 2 days ago, the call for ceasefire, the United States vetoed, and I don't know if you saw the video. The next day, there was the human rights, the United Nations Human Rights Commission, and the UN ambassador got up to speak. The delegations turned their back on the United States representative who was speaking in that commission, because the resolution was actually to call for ceasefire and humanitarian supply to enter. That was it. It didn't ask anyone to take any position or anything, just say, which is the foundation of UN Charter and foundation for Geneva Convention. Right? So again, the U.S. veto power. Extending military and economic support. Today, Israel announced that the United States have sent 1,000 tons, they received 1,000 tons in addition to already all of the ammunition. The U.S. allowed Israel to have access to 6 ammunition depository that the U.S. have pre-positioned in Israel, basically gave them the key. You have access to them. And so far, Israel have used bombing equal to the bombs that have been thrown on Japan, the nuclear bomb, right? In a space that is equal to the city of Philadelphia, right? Almost 75,000 tons of bombs have been thrown on Gaza in the past 11 days, right? It's actually said it's more than what the U.S. used in Afghanistan. I cannot verify this, but we could take a look and see. So that's in the amount of space, and the United States is basically extending this support. U.S. is sending 2,000 troops, force to assist. So the United States is not only neutral because it says that they're honest broker. They're broker, but honestly have nothing to do with it. I think that there'll be a test for that. Shield Israel in all international settings. There was a cases in the ICC, International Criminal Court. The United States threatened the ICC if they do anything or move that, the United States will actually prosecute and go after them. So the ICC is basically almost a standstill for any case relative to Israel. U.S. links aid to normalization with Israel. This is something that we need to know. When the United States allocate 200 million or 500 million to Egypt or Jordan or any Muslim country and African country, they often condition the aid to have a portion of it linked to the Israeli economy. In many of the aid for the Arab countries, 5% of it has to be directly linked to Israeli. In essence, makes an obligation for countries that are taking U.S. aid to basically normalize their relations, because the idea is you create economic interest, and that economic interest will actually, not to use Trump's political interest. So you actually purchase people's economic benefits and create an elite that is wedded to Israel's interest, and therefore when push comes to shove, literally they will align with their economic interest. So that's the economic framing of U.S. aid. Incentivize corporate and military corporations to work with Israel. That's why every corporation in the United States have a major engagement with Israel, with major offices, major research, and especially if you're in the area of surveillance and security, is basically Israel is the go-to place, and it's wedded by the United States contracts in this sense. Pegasus as one of the tools for surveillance and breakdown of security. Israel is the go-to, and it's incentivized by the U.S. government, right? Because often they tell us that Israel is the startup country. Well, if I have a major superpower giving me all these incentives with billions of dollars every day and facilitating I will be the startup. I'll start up companies all the way in Mars, right? But it's being used in essence to project a racist view that look of you Palestinians, look at you Arabs and Muslims, you can't develop anything. So it's actually wedded in it, this type of dehumanization, because again, if you have the big superpower with you, I would say if you did not develop, there must be something wrong with you. That should be the question rather than to actually the other way around. Punishes opposition to Israel. All right, and we see it in the last 2 weeks. All right? Universities, people losing their job, people that are posting on Palestine, they're being going after, but that's nothing new. Many individuals who have often challenged Israel have always faced the punishment in this country. One of the oldest cases in this country is the LA8 case from Reagan, 1987, where they were charged literally of crimes at the time, being charged with supporting worldwide communism. That was a dubious charge against them. Reagan wanted to use a case to move the law on immigration to be used as a tool of national security. And that's where we are right now. So the test case was the LA8 case. It went to the Supreme Court a number of times and lasted many years until 2009. And Supreme Court ruled on differentiation between green card holders, alien versus citizens. So alien green card holders do not enjoy the same constitutional rights in this country as citizens. That was the LA8 case. Began in 1987 and did not end until 2009, rewired the legal system and immigration law. So that's part, and then criminalizes and target Palestinian activism here in the United States, not only here, but also across. The PDS, trying to target PDS activists, criminalizing activities in there, and increasingly also to try to pass legislation on the definition of anti-Semitism, to use it that if you critique Israel, then it is Zionism and Israel, then it's a form of anti-Semitism. So all this just to indicate what the US as a policy, how it empowers Israel and emboldens it relative to its conduct and operation. I want to conclude with the following, that events are unfolding fast. While Israel expressed a goal is in essence to try to target and eliminate the organization that attacked Israel, the larger goal is to reconstitute Israel deterrence. From 1948 till, I would say, the past few years, Israel is seen as the regional hegemon. Everybody is afraid and scared of Israel's status and position, and as such, Israel now have to reconstitute that deterrence, which is in essence people to fear this centrality. And I don't know whether that is possible. In 2014, I said that Israel have lost much of its standing and it's not possible to reconstitute it. And they cannot shoot their way out of a crisis that is far more critical and internal. You know, you could sign an agreement with the United Arab Emirates, you could sign an agreement with any of these countries. At the end of the day, unless and until you deal with the Palestinians, who are about 6.8 million inside historical Palestine, you're just wasting your time and literally engaging in inconsequential activity. They think that the Arab world is going to shield Israel from the demands of the Palestinians for freedom and sovereignty. And that's delusional, and I think it's exactly what Israel is facing. And now they're bringing much of the Western world to try to force Israel's position at a time was not tenable. Before I came, actually, the poll that was put out, 66% of the American public says that they call for a ceasefire. Not only Democrat, Republicans, independent, and anyone, 66%, which almost 2/3 of the American public is demanding ceasefire. So the fact that our political leadership is actually out of step with the people shows the type of almost circling the wagon that is taking place, and I would say it shows the level of insecurity for both Zionists in here and Israel in relation to the dynamics that are taking place. And I think that's what we need to pay attention to, what is occurring in this country. I think it's opening the discussions and debate in a large way. So Jazakumullah khair for listening. I think we have some time for some questions. I'll take a few questions and then we'll call it for a night, inshallah. Jazakumullah.
What's the purpose of international law if there's nothing that enforces it?
Yeah. That's a good question. The problem with international law does not have an enforceability mechanism. Even though that there is a set of agencies that have been entrusted, let's say most of international law is actually functioning. All right? For example, many of us take airplanes, right? And you don't think that there is a whole international system that makes it possible for you to travel and go on. Same in terms of the movement of products across the world. Like you could call and get a shipment from anywhere in the world. There's a whole agreements, and you go to the port, you have companies, all that is there. The World Health Organization, right, is a very functioning system until we got Clorox as the remedy for COVID, right? But in general, there is a considerable cooperation on that level and agreement. The areas that are the most critical areas that deals with land rights, borders, and sovereignty, and that's where nation-state political priorities and sometimes entanglement makes it difficult, especially when the major powers themselves are the primary violators, right? Under the Fourth Geneva Convention, which was an important moment in the history, right, that countries agreed to have a particular structure of how war is to be conducted among nation states. So Israel is violating almost every article of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Israel cannot bomb a building and say we suspect people to be under it or over it or whatever. You cannot. Even if you have doubt that there are civilians or that the individuals there are not combatant, you have to err international law to treat them as civilians. So Israel has been bombing a building up and down. All are violations of international law. International law says you cannot actually cut food from people. You could, if you have a guerrilla and you want to fight them, by all means, go ahead. You know, international law allows you to fight a war against a combatant that is fighting you. You have all the rights to do so, but you don't have the right to say because this person as a civilian has a sympathy with this guerrilla, you cannot actually target that individual. Right? So the problem of international law, again, is in a system that is dominated by nation states and nation states that are violating international law, the United States being foremost, Great Britain, which we always say no longer great, right? France, Russia, and China. That's where the problem is. Most of the rest of the world actually adhere to a certain extent. And until we are able to reconfigure the international system to give equal say and equal weight for veto power and what there's been negotiations of reapportioning like the United Nations, because Russia, US, Britain and France having the veto power and only China is unequal, right? Maybe France was great at one point, right? But it's no longer the major power that it is. Without the natural gas and the gold they steal, they're just, you know, not a major power. Also Britain. You have other major powers that are rising. Brazil is rising. Again, India is rising. I have done my work on the Hindutva, but they're a rising power. They constitute about 20% of the world population. There's other countries that are emerging that they don't have a say in the international system. So that's where we need to demand a way for us to alter this landscape. So it's a good question, but the lack of enforceability, especially in land disputes, in major disputes among major powers, end up being the case. And every major power has a proxy states, meaning they conduct their policy by other means. Not to be what you call unclear, I would expect that Russia is using this conflict in the region for its own interests. It has no love for the Palestinians, has no love for Muslims. So all of a sudden, we're going to say Allahu Akbar for Putin, you know, where he has been responsible. Russia has been responsible for tremendous type of injury for Muslims. Also China, we have the Uyghur, right? So definitely they have their interests. They have the new policy and so on. So we should not delude ourselves. Just because somebody gets up and says a good statement about Palestine, which they should, we should not confuse it that they don't have strategic interests. So their strategic interests at play. If you don't know your strategic interests, people will give you theirs. And unfortunately, this is just as honest as it can be, Palestinians, we have taken the strategic interests of so many players historically, hoping that they're going to, what you call, support us. More often than not, they delivered us rather than support us. And again, the history of Palestinians in the Arab world, I would give it as exhibit 1 through 10, just to understand the dynamic. If you need a clear case, the 1974 Arab Summit, right? And I use the summit in the Arabic rather than the English, right? So the Arab Summit, the agreement between Morocco and the Israeli government is to allow the Israeli Mossad to bug all of the rooms of the Arab delegations that came to the Arab Summit in Morocco, and they did. But why did King Hassan do this? And I'm not picking on King Hassan of Morocco, it's just one clear example. the Moroccan government, the King Hassan of Morocco, allowed the Israeli Mossad to bug all of the hotel rooms of the Arab delegations that were coming to the 1974 Arab Summit to discuss Palestine, and in essence, allowed them to. Now, to tell you that the Mossad has been having relations with Morocco since the early 1960s, because there was an attempted coup and a political upheaval in Morocco. So the Mossad alerted to King Hassan at the time, and in quid pro quo, the Mossad became an important part of training his security in return that he will allow and facilitate Moroccans to migrate to Israel. And 1 million Moroccans migrated to Israel and became Israeli citizens. So, and long and behold, King Hassan was the chair of the Jerusalem Committee for the Arab world. Right? So this is just the reality. And you don't need to take my word, just Google when he died. The New York Times ran a whole long article. So people would say, oh, he's picking, I could pick on a number of other people, but that's just like you have a clear, what you call, evidence of what is taking place. So there's definitely many players at it. I'm here.
Yeah, with both political parties, I'm watching the news, being somehow anti-Muslim, should we vote?
Well, you should vote, but you should vote for your strategic interest. If voting was not unimportant, our opposition would not be so vested in it because they know the impact of it. I have my critique on Muslim voting because we tend to be almost ceremonial. Like if somebody comes in here today from whatever, we'll put them in here, we take pictures with them, and we're happy to put it on our Instagram that so and so have what you call. So our engagement politically is ceremonial. We don't have a strategic priorities of our list. We don't send the candidates a list of questions to respond, and according to response, we vote. The second is we only vote once every 4 years. We come out politically. Politics is a contact sport. You need to train for it every day. Meaning that you should go meet with, like, delegation from your mosque should meet monthly with the city council of your district, right? Should meet monthly with the mayor, right? In order to say, here's our issues, including, again, from local to transnational, and say, here's the issues. So when they come, you judge them on their voting records, not whether they attended Eid, right? I don't care whether they come to Eid or not. I don't care if they come and say with what you call broken Arabic, right? I'm not an Arabic 101 class. Assalamu alaikum, I love Islam, I love you Muslims, I love your food. I care less whether I want to see your voting record. What did you vote on this, on this, on this, and this? So if it's 8 out of 10, again, it's a P+, we'll pass, we'll vote for you again. Right? And if you're going to our opposition and you go right now, every politician that goes and celebrated and vote opposed, that is the meaning of Muslim, called Muslims terrorists, did anything, you should take them to task. I don't want to see you in our parking lot. I don't want to see you in Eid. I would vote for the birds before I vote for you. More importantly, run into election yourself. The worst thing that can happen is you could lose, right? So I would encourage our people to begin running for election. If so, nobody is representing your issues, run for yourself. You might win. All right. The worst could be is you could lose, but more sure that you put your, what you call, here's my issues. Palestine is one of my issues. Racism is my issue. Better education is my issues, right? You put those issues and run. And people believe it will actually rally behind you because they don't like the type of political structures that we have. But I don't think that our response should be to go and not vote, because in essence, you're leaving the landscape empty for our opposition. And your opposition has perfected the political system, and that's why they invest heavily in it. If voting was not important, why is it that they try to make it so difficult for people of color to vote? If voting was not so important, why is it that the civil rights movement was so structurally understanding the right to vote? So we should not be what immediately, as soon as the political landscape goes against us, we go and seek what you call mental therapy and just sit in our home and say, I'm not. It's a contact sport, politics. It's one of the most dangerous contact sports that I could say, because it has to do with the life of people. Right? Because they're invested, that's why Biden is looking for the 2024 election. He's looking at outdoing Trump. And I would say in his statements, he outdid Trump. But is outdoing Trump will get him the votes? I think he lost Michigan. I'm talking to people in Michigan. They say there's no way we're going to come out and vote for Democrats in the 2024. Biden is not going to get a vote. We're not going to vote for Biden 24. Yeah, I talked to people in Georgia. Georgia was thin, right? They're not voting for Biden. Chicago. Do you think that people in Chicago are going to vote for Biden? New Jersey. Are you thinking that people are just saying, you could do whatever you want, but you hit us literally with your Islamophobia. The way that the Islamophobic discourse that have taken place, the demonization, the silencing, the doxing of people, all these political leadership that for the past 20 years, they thought that what you call they're building relations, all just completely was fictitious and basically taken us for granted. So I'm encouraging people, run for election, get your name, put your name in there and talk to people, put your platform and go out and do that and have an impact in that way.
Just a quick question. Can you give a word of advice, especially to college students, on what is like the most important thing they could be doing today to support the cause of Palestine?
Information, but information that is sound, not emotional. Right? I know that as Arabs, Muslims, we go from 0 to 80 in less than 3 seconds, faster than a Tesla. This is not the moment for you. I know there's a couple of people that engage in fist fight. That's not the place for you. This is the place for information and sound debate and to have reasonable discourse. Most of the American public is not your enemy. So don't take what Fox, CNN, and so on, they want to stoke Americans against you and stoke you against the American public, which you are part of, in order for you not to. You have your core Zionists that, it's about 1.5%, 2%, but your main focus is to reach out to the 96% that is not Muslim, not Arab, not Jewish. And even among young Jews, there are large number, again, the ones that went to Congress, Jewish Voice for Peace, not in our name. So you need to be very, very clear and strategic. Don't take the public relations campaign against you and internalize it in how you talk and discuss with other people. You're just like actually becoming a fulfillment of the propaganda campaign. If somebody says you're this and this and this, and you act this and this, then their strategy have actually been successful. Second, I want you to organize and make sure if you're doing something, contact Muslim Legal Fund of America, contact CARE, contact Palestine Legal. No one by themselves can figure it out. So make sure that you actually contact people, especially if the administration contacts you and so on. We have legal resources, support to you as a college student, so make sure to engage in that way. I'll take the last question because. Wa alaikum salam.
I see that we have a big problem in division within our community. I feel like we're all separate groups. How can we mobilize to become one voice and become one set vote so that we have, a more powerful movement forward and being able to represent our community? What we need to do, we have a great amount of numbers, but everybody's dispersed. Everybody has, either a political group, an Arab group, a separate race group or a professional group, but we're not one voice, we're not one community. How can we mobilize to be able to have one joint vote so that when a politician comes in, he sees 200 or 300,000 votes that get behind an agenda that represents us properly? And then ultimately, how can we also, promote or fund this particular group or movement?
Yeah, I don't think having one group is what's needed. I think what we need is a set of strategic principles that people act upon. And I know people want a single type of a body. I think what we need is a strategic commitment to come up and develop, these are the set of principles for the American Muslim, for the Arab, for the Palestinians, and we engage politically in that way. And part of a gap is, again, is that we are very strong in grassroots mobilization, which is as honest as I can be, but we are not as effective in the follow-up post the grassroots mobilization. So it gives the impression that we are not as effective because we have not utilized, because in general, in organizing, you have spikes, right? Every time there is a major movement, there's a spike. That spike should be the moment where you actually can get some of the people that come out and transform them into structured organizing and structured engagement. And until we are able to do that, to outdo in organizing our opponents' numbers. They are very good at structural organizing and coming out, let's say, in Congress, in Senate, in political mobilization, that for us, the grassroots does not meet that. So I think what we need is a set of strategic principles, set of strategic items that we agree upon and organize accordingly, because I don't think it's possible to bring everybody that is from diverse ideological, ethnic, and backgrounds into one format. Like, again, if you just take the Palestinians by themselves, we're divided. There's ideological divisions. There's divisions in terms of the various villages, different towns have their organizing. There also you have differences in terms of class stratification that we don't look at and how to bring it. And then if you take it to the Arab community, it's also a wide differences that are there. So a principle allow people to recognize the principle and can overcome the differences in order to act upon it. So that would be how I approach it.
We all fall under the umbrella of Islam, right? Even if we're Arab, even if we're Palestinian, we all agree we're Muslim, right? And so I think that is what matters, right? We need to have one Muslim American voice that doesn't seem to be here, not in this state locally, not in the national level.
I have a different approach. I think it is to our detriment to have a singular voice, because just like it had a positive implication, can you imagine that singular voice says, I support George Bush invasion of Iraq. We're stuck with that. I think what we need is to embrace a way for us to utilize our diversity in a dynamic way. That's, I think, if there is a $10 billion investment to be had, it's how to figure out, we have a very diverse Muslim community with diverse background, how to actually utilize it to act in unison on principles without having to lose the specificity and allow multiple voices. I think we are far stronger with multiple voices rather than singularity. I think singularity will have a challenge in terms of both where we are and what the consequences of it. That's for me, just I'm very cognizant of what be the negative consequences, even though that might be some positive that will be attained.
Can we give a chance to the sisters
If they have any questions, by all means, can you take the microphone to them, or is there a microphone in the back?
The sisters, if any have any question, just come a little bit forward, or write it down on a piece of paper.
I said last question, so I'll take one.
Just we'll wait 1 minute. We'll wait 1 minute, see if they want to come up with any questions. أنا قلت one question كلهم شردوا على الغرفة ولا راحوا.
Okay. We just covered as much. I know Palestine is an issue that you have to have multiple semesters on it. So I know there's many questions. What I ask you is
Sisters, do we have any questions?
what I'll ask you right now to do is that I want you to take the White House phone number. All right. So let me put the White House phone number. I have it. All right. So 202. Just Google it. Okay. Google it. Make sure as you get up in the morning to make the habit of calling the White House every day right now. All right. They take comments from 11 to 3:30 every morning. Call the White House and give them your mind about Palestine and what you want the ceasefire, ending U.S. aid to Israel immediately, and our taxes should not be to support a war crimes that is unfolding. Just like you make sure to take your coffee at Starbucks, this is far more important for you to put this. When you're driving, just dial it and just call. They register each of the calls and they report how many calls they got every day. Right? Our opposition does it almost constantly. We need to have the same type of discipline in relation to our health. This is your cause. Again, you're watching the news. You have to make it a habit. It's not, again, very difficult. It takes 2 minutes from your time, maybe 5 minutes. Make that as a habit for you to do it on a daily basis. Right? 202-456-1414. 202-456-1414. Just make the habit to call and just take, Uncle Biden, I've been calling him, all kinds of responding to him on Twitter. Just make sure to do so. 202-456-1414. Okay, so just make sure to make it. And also, if you have your local representative, I would say have him as part of your dialing again.
About the American politics. So for a government, for any politician to take decisions opposing 2/3 of the population, aren't they afraid that for the next term they're going to lose? Or is it becoming more like a third world country? You just do what you want to do, and there's absolutely.
Well, I would say it's to their detriment. I already said that our communities in Michigan, you cannot win Michigan without having the Arab, Muslim, Palestinian population voting for you. We know that what happened with Hillary Clinton. She completely disrespected the community, and the community did not go out. And literally, she lost by 10,000 votes. I said at the time, one Arab wedding would got the 10,000 vote easily. So now I know for a fact that Michigan has been lost for the Democrats. And they have to go and gain the trust of the community. The community just completely turned off on the Democrats because what Biden did. Georgia, and you could talk to people in Georgia. Georgia's Muslim community is highly mobilized, and they have voted and continue to vote. The Democrats have lost Georgia. And Georgia, again, we know how central it was in the past election. In Pennsylvania, Illinois have a large now. People are just, so the Democrats basically are, in 2024, I would say they're right now losing the Muslim populations in the critical states. I don't say we have a massive political base across the country, but we have states where we are a decisive minority within those states. Again, New Jersey is very key. In New Jersey, even parts of New York is very key. So in those areas, in Minnesota, in those areas where we have our strength, we have to demonstrate our strength. And in politics, you reward your friends and you punish your enemies right on the ballot box. So we have to punish those who demonize us in this cycle. Use Islamophobia again. We say our vote is not cheap. Right? Our vote is just not for you to come in and laugh in our face and then go to Israel and celebrate and basically incite against genocide. It's genocide is taking place, and we need to actually say, here's our response to you. You cannot come into our community and take our votes.
Trump, if he gets to be the nominee for the Republican Party.
Again, you have to make your priorities. Okay. Jazakumullah khair, barakallah fikum. So tomorrow we're going to DC. There's demonstration for those who are able to drive. It's a short drive, but inshallah, if you are able, there's also other protests in New York and other places. we have to make our voice. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم.
ما راح تقاتل